Here now is your host for today's program, Ruth Copland.
Welcome to the show. You're listening to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland. In case you're a new listener, a bit of background on me. I'm British, but I've lived in Santa Cruz for over 10 years, and I'm also an American citizen. I have a professional background in the arts, in music, writing and performance, and also in psychotherapy and business. And if you're new to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland, in the first hour, we look at all kinds of topics from all kinds of angles, attempting to see if we have more in common than divides us, and focusing on debate rather than one-sided conversations. And we keep a balance between the left and the right brain, with the second hour featuring an in-depth interview with a guest from the arts. If you'd like to contact me, you can email Ruth at KSCO.com. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the show and issues that you might want me to cover. And I will also try to monitor that email address during the show in case you feel like giving your opinion via email. So that's Ruth at KSCO.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and message me there. My Twitter name is at Ruth Copland, Copland. And you're listening on KSCO AM 1080 or maybe to the live stream at KSCO.com, which means that we have listeners around America and the world. So welcome to you all. In the second hour today, just after 3, after the news, I'll be interviewing Edmund McMillen, artist, indie game designer and joint CEO with his partner Tommy Rafenez of independent gaming company Team Meat. Originally working graphically in the independent comic book medium, Edmund has designed concepts and artwork for many hugely popular indie video games, including Grey Matter, Coil, Triachnid, Ether, Time, Bleep, Spewer, Gish, Super Meat Boy, and The Binding of Isaac. After years of sacrifice and struggle to stay independent, Edmund and Tommy found commercial success with their game Super Meat Boy, which took off in a huge way with millions of sales. Critics lauded the game's precise control, retro artwork, and soundtrack. And Edmund and Tommy in the development process of Super Meat Boy are featured in the film Indie Game the Movie. Team Meat's follow-up game, The Binding of Isaac, has accrued over 2 million sales, and fans eagerly await the next game, Mugenics, which is due out when it's ready, maybe sometime in 2014. And Edmund is a Santa Cruz long-time resident, so he'll be coming live into the studio today, which will be great. We'll talk about his life and work and what inspires him to use his art in video games. So do stay with us and hear what Santa Cruz local Edmund McMillen has to say just after 3. So what have we got coming up this hour? Again, after the news, I'll be interviewing Edmund McMillen, artist, indie game designer. So stay here for that. You're listening to KSCO AM 1080, Santa Cruz.
Once again, here's your host, Ruth Copland.
Welcome back to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland, and thanks for our callers in the first hour of the show. This hour, I'm very excited to have in the studio with me Edmund McMillen, artist, indie game designer, and joint CEO with his partner Tommy Rafenez of independent gaming company Team Meat. Originally working graphically in the independent comic book medium, Edmund has designed concepts and artwork for many hugely popular indie games, including Grey Matter, Coil, Triachnid, Ether, Time, Bleep, Spewer, Gish, Super Meat Boy, and The Binding of Isaac. Gish won Game Tunnel's 2004 Adventure Game of the Year, as well as Indie Game of the Year. Coil was nominated for the Innovation Award at the 2009 Independent Games Festival, and Ether was a 2009 Indiecade finalist and received an honourable mention. Edmund also contributed art to the hit game Braid. After years of sacrifice and struggle to stay independent, Edmund and Tommy found commercial success with their game Super Meat Boy, which took off in a huge way with millions of sales. Super Meat Boy also won awards for Most Challenging Game from IGN and for Best Downloadable Game from GameSpot and Game Trailers. Critics lauded the game's precise control, retro artwork and soundtrack. Edmund and Tommy in the development process of Super Meat Boy are featured in the film Indie Game The Movie. Super Meat Boy is a platform game in which players control a small dark red cube-shaped character named Meat Boy, vulnerable as he has no skin, who must save his girlfriend Bandage Girl from Dr. Fetus. And the game is divided into chapters which together contain over 300 levels. And players attempt to reach the end of each level, represented by Bandage Girl, while avoiding crumbling blocks, saw blades and various other fatal obstacles. The player can jump and run on platforms and can jump off or slide down walls. The core gameplay requires fine control and split-second timing and has been compared to, regarding both gameplay and level of difficulty, to traditional platform games such as Super Mario Bros. Team Meat's follow-up game, The Binding of Isaac, has accrued over 2 million sales, and fans eagerly await the next game, Mugenics, which is due out when it's ready, maybe sometime in 2014. Welcome to the studio, Edmund.
Thanks for having me.
So, for listeners who are not gamers, I wanted to clarify the difference between indie games and the big company games we're all familiar with from the media, such as Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Skyrim. Yeah. It seems that indie games have much more to do with the art and the aesthetic. Would you say that's true? And I was wondering what other differences you would perhaps...
I would say that it has more to do with the freedom of an individual or two people, smaller teams that have a more specific and louder voice. Mainstream games have to be mainstream. They have to sell. So they're very formed to sell and sell well. So they're trying to just generalize. Everything is generalized, and they're, looking at what's hot, what's cool, what's in now, and how to maximize the money. Independent games don't care that much about money because, for the most part, there's not a lot. Sometimes you can make a good amount of money off of indie games, but I'd say most indies are in it because they want to make something that they haven't seen before.
Right. And I'm familiar somewhat with video games. I have two sons, and it was my eldest son, Tomas, who actually suggested I interview you because he has all your games. And so when he was last home, he showed me a lot of your games, and I was really struck by the artistic nature of them, much more so than obviously a lot of the games, like Grand Theft Auto and those sort of player games, are very realistic, but they're not artistic, I would say, in the way that your games are.
Well, yeah, my games are all hand drawn because I hand draw them.
Yeah.
If you mean in that respect, artistically, but yeah.
Just the aesthetic. It definitely seems like art to me. It's a game, but it seems like art rather. I don't think of like Grand Theft Auto as art really in that same sense. I
kind of do.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, it's art in the sense of social commentary. I think it does a good job at that.
Yeah.
Games like Grand Theft Auto are actually comparable to indie games in terms of breaking the rules. The Grand Theft Auto games really are pretty, they do what they want, they say what they want, and they don't care about what other people have to say about it. They're pretty controversial. And a lot of indie games are like that too. They just, they're in a situation where that worked really well, made a lot of money. It was a big risk, I'm sure, initially, but now they can continue to do that freely and kind of push the boundaries.
Right.
Rockstar is known for making more adult, kind of experimental, weird, social commentary for the most part. It's usually, the kids that play it might not think so, but it's there.
That's true. I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective. Perhaps more so than something like Call of Duty.
Yeah, it's hard to say. That could be social commentary as well. It's kind of
that's true.
messed up in a way. But it's kind of the reverse. It's kind of society kind of pushing in of what they like and they like to do. It also, the army in general, kind of because they sponsor all that sort of stuff. So.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, I was wondering what first drew you to art. I believe you started drawing as a child.
Yeah, I think it was just something that I was told that I could do well at an early age, and because I felt that it made me different than other people. I continued to do it, and it made me happy to do it. I was always drawn to just creating things, and I would isolate myself. I tend to just hang out by myself and imagine whatever game I wanted to play and whatever adventure I wanted to go on, and take long walks in the forest by myself with a stick and stuff. So that's basically what I was doing, what I was drawn to, creating stuff, and whatever I could imagine I could draw, and I thought that was pretty cool, and that just kind of pushed me in that direction.
Yeah. That's interesting that you spend a lot of time doing that. Did you also spend time playing games?
Well, when I was really little, there weren't that many. I got an Atari when I was 7, I think, but it was a pretty big deal. Atari's really awesome, and having a home console is cool, but I actually missed a lot of the arcade stuff. I was too young for the actual initial video game boom in the early 80s.
Yeah.
But I got into it. I think I started getting into video games a lot once Mario hit, once the Nintendo hit. I was the last kid on my block to get one, but I was probably the most obsessive when it came to playing them.
Right, yeah. I mean, a lot of people think that the playing of games has sort of taken over, hijacked young people's creativity, because it's so easy to play games, and they're perhaps not wandering in the forest with a stick thinking. I mean, what's your kind of take on that? I
mean, I think they're just kids who are creative and kids who aren't. I think the same kids, if a parent sees a kid and sees them just glued to a video game and not doing anything creative, there's a chance that the kid's just not really creative.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, for me, those early games really, because back when games were pretty primitive, you had to use your imagination. You had to fill in the gaps, and that's kind of what I do now. I try my best to leave things open and let people put in their own personality, interpretations into what's going on. Leave things mysterious, and like when you're a kid and you go on an adventure and you get to imagine what's behind that rock and whatever.
Yeah. Because I think your games are known for not having very many instructions. You work it out more for yourself, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, of course, more value in that, too, just in general. You learn more when you're hands-on with something, and you feel better about learning when you are taught in a way that allows you to experiment and then learn from your experimentations and then go build from there. You feel smart. You feel like you've accomplished more than somebody just saying, this is how you do it. This is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. There's an easy way to do that with design in general, how to instruct people in a way that allows, it's being a teacher, a good teacher. Like any teacher just doesn't go, a bad teacher goes and reads from a book and says, this is how this is done, and then goes to the next thing and reads that. I think a good teacher gives children like the tools that they need to accomplish something, and then lets them, takes a step back and lets them go in and solve it for themselves, because there's no real value in just getting somebody to repeat what you said.
Yeah, that's very true. It certainly feels a lot better when you do it yourself, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, it feels like you've accomplished something.
Yeah, because you have.
That's the same reason why I use I push difficulty in my games, because I feel like doing something that is challenging is important.
Right. Yeah. You started off in comics, I understand. What made you want to take your art into video games?
I kind of hit a wall with my comics. I was self-publishing them locally, and I probably made about 10 to 12 in a few years during high school and out. And I kind of just didn't know where I could go from there. I started submitting my stuff to different publishers and getting rejection letters and getting crushed. For the most part,
That's always the hard part of being an artist, any kind of artist, isn't it? Is all the rejection.
Well, I kind of noticed, I think, at an early age that what I was doing wasn't for the masses. It wasn't something somebody was going to make money off of, and possibly not something I could ever make money off of, but it's something that I needed, and it's something that I needed to do. So I thought, well, what would make me happy is if I could maximize at least people seeing my work. I didn't really care if people were buying it, because I was just making enough money to print more comics. So I decided to put all my stuff online, and that was like in 1999, 2000, so like the early internet boom. And I made my own website. I took a few classes at Cabrillo and ended up failing most of them, but I learned what I needed, and I went home and obsessively built a website where I started self-publishing my comics that way. And I actually used a program called Flash to do that, which kind of had a lot of action script interactive elements to it, and you could kind of make a game with it.
Right.
And I learned how to kind of make a game with it, and I kind of went from there, and that's kind of where I transitioned into more interactive game art stuff. It was an easy transition from comics to the internet to Flash games.
Right. Well, if you just joined us, I'm talking to Edmund McMillen, artist, indie game designer, and joint CEO of Team Meat, an independent gaming company. And if you want to find out more about Edmund and his games and his art, you can go to his website, edmundm.com. We're going to go to a commercial break now, but do join us to hear more about Edmund's life, work, and his art. Keep it here. You're listening to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland.
Issues and entertainment. That's AM 1080 KSCO.
Welcome back to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland and my guest of this hour, Edmund McMillen. We were just talking over the break, and his partner, Tommy, his last name is pronounced Reffiness. And I was really upset because I really thought I'd got it right, because I know it gets mispronounced. But anyway, just for Tommy, I'm just letting everybody know it's Reffiness. So I'm just going to call him Tommy from now on.
He can die happy.
There you are, yeah. He, obviously was going to be very disturbed by me having pronounced it incorrectly.
He probably broke his keyboard when he heard it.
Anyway, moving on, I was wondering, you go from like hand-drawn drawings, this is just really for me, how does it become the game? Do you then use a program that you draw on a screen? Or?
It depends on who I work with. If I'm working in Flash, and Flash is a program that was initially designed for animation and web design, so I just draw it in there. Like I have a tablet, and I just draw it in and I animate it frame by frame in there, and then those things become clips, and those clips get called into place in the game, in the engine.
Right, I see. Because the reason you have a partnership with Tommy is because he does programming.
Yes.
So for us who are not so techie, that
he makes the engine. So not only does he program, he goes beyond that, and he makes all the engines for our games. So what they run on. Usually somebody will use somebody else's software. Like some of the games I've made in Flash are made in Flash. That's the engine that is being used.
Okay.
But when I work with Tommy, we work in his Tommyism engine, which he probably has a new name for now, but his engine that he made, and he has complete control over every little aspect of it.
Ah, interesting. And I was wondering how you come up with the look of a game, whether you come up with the concept first or the design or the art. I mean, do you doodle and then...
I think I do. I do start with doodling for the most part, and I'll experiment with a concept or a feeling or whatever. Like with Isaac, it was like I want to make a game that somehow talks about my religious upbringing and my relationship with religion in general, and I tend to reference and kind of riff off of existing video game structures. So like Super Meat Boy is based on Super Mario Brothers. It's constantly referencing that. It's constantly referencing my relationship with video games in general, and The Binding of Isaac is referencing The Legend of Zelda. Even like the names of both of them are, The Legend of Zelda, The Binding of Isaac, Super Meat Boy, Super Mario Brothers. It's all referencing my childhood growing up with video games and my experiences and how they tie in. And The Legend of Zelda was based off of Miyamoto's childhood and exploration and stuff like that as a kid. And like I said before, that's something that I've felt like tied to because I had experienced that as well. So I kind of wanted to do the same thing, but growing up as a creative kid in a religious household and kind of being the black sheep of the family, I wanted to experiment with how I was kind of raised and how that felt, and how, the dangers of being a creative kid or feeling like an outsider in your family, and, or religion making you feel evil as a young child.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Binding of Isaac, which you were also telling me is not a team meet game. It's a game you designed with somebody else. For people who are not that familiar with gaming, the subject matter of it is just would never occur to me one could address that in a game. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you have, and for people listening, it's based on the biblical
Binding of Isaac, the
Binding
story.
of Isaac,
Yeah.
but it's also about people seeing sin in their child, isn't it? And I wanted to ask you, there was a case really recently about these two women, I don't know if you saw it, who killed two children and tortured the others simply because they thought that they had the devil in them and they were trying to purify them.
It's surprisingly not an uncommon thing.
Yeah.
I see, people will link me to, 2 or 3 articles almost every year saying, oh, look, the Binding of Isaac inspired these people. And, the Binding of Isaac plays around with a lot of different, religious themes and questions. And I always thought it was pretty interesting, the stories in the Bible that a lot of people feel like are literal and believe are real. And just the simple, okay, well, what if God did tell you to kill your son or whatever to test your faith? Because he did do that in the Bible, that you believe.
Right,
and, what would happen in that situation? And that was kind of where that initial experimentation took place. It's I can kind of reference my feelings on religion. And, realistically, when I started the thing, it was pretty angsty, anti-religious. And as I explored it, I kind of grew to appreciate the creative side of religion and how religion really did inspire me and did a lot of good for me growing up, even when it comes to making me feel like an outsider. I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't feel like one. And it motivated me into what I am today. So, I don't know, it was a dance around poking fun at religion, but also, I guess, in a way, giving props to religion because it's creative.
Right.
The Bible's an incredibly creative story and full of very interesting things. And as a kid, was hugely inspiring.
Yeah.
Especially Revelation stuff, the real fire and brimstone sort of stuff has made a big impact on me when I was little, and I always thought it was pretty cool. Thought, how awesome would it be if I were to survive long enough to see demons rise out of the ocean and destroy the world?
Yeah.
If only.
It's an amazing vision, isn't it? And I always find it interesting, a lot of the stuff in the Bible is, visions from prophets, people who've been inspired talking to God. And yet people are so intolerant of anyone in latter-day times who is inspired or apparently has, had a message or whatever. And yet, the Bible, I don't know if it's because it's, from a long time ago, it's sort of...
Well, some of the more interesting things as far as how I've, with my father, who is still very, he's born-again Christian and very, very religious. And he has played the Binding of Isaac. He knows about it. I gave him copies. He, of course, wants copies of my work. And I think they had a little Bible study thing with the adults somewhere. Took a trip, and then all the kids stayed in the church, and they did an all-nighter sort of situation. And he brought copies of the Binding of Isaac for all the kids to play. And I'm Dad, it kind of
controversial.
I don't know if it kind of go. And he's no, but it's by the book. From his perspective,
right?
It's by the book, and I thought that was really interesting. I mean, that was the point, I'm experimenting with something I think is interesting.
Yes. Yeah. I'm surprised that your game has been linked to, as being a cause for people behaving like that, because it's pre-existing material, isn't it? It's in the Bible. It's part of extreme kind of Christian belief.
I don't think people really think that it's actually inspiring people to do anything, but they do.
People like to do that kind of thing, don't they?
Yeah. When I made it, I remember when I made it, the week that it came out, I read an article of a woman killing her son and was what the hell's going on here? Because I didn't. I knew it wasn't that uncommon, but I didn't hear it. And, when you work on something and your mind's already there and then you start seeing it everywhere, it's whoa.
Yeah.
That seems odd.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, we were talking somewhat in the first hour, we were talking about violence in entertainment. about how things are presented in such a black and white way. And I think when you have that in a culture, it also leads to a lot of scapegoating. And I think that is what is happening in a lot of these situations. It's like people are perceiving the other. You're calling it the outsider, but it's like, and then that's demonized, something that's not understood or different from you. Then that just becomes all wrong and has to be eliminated, however that happens. And that's gone on a long time. I mean, obviously, my son's just been doing the Crucible. I mean, that's a good example of that kind of a thing. So seems like it's just a subject previously would never have occurred to me could be in a game. So I think that's terribly creative.
There's a lot. I mean, video games get a bad rap because they are viewed as just base entertainment and like something you do to waste time and just have fun for a few minutes. And you can still take it as that. You don't need to think at all about the game and what's going on in the game. But, I mean, this is my chosen medium. This is how I choose to express myself and how I choose to write and how I choose to illustrate and where I like to explore. It's like my little playground, and I like to talk about personal things. Not everybody does. You know, not every independent game developer likes to, put personal things or express themselves through their work, and that's completely fine. But I do. It's just it's my cup of tea. It's what I was doing when I was making comics. So it's kind of an easy transition from there. And it's also extra fun because then I get to play around with the design elements, which are really interesting in themselves, and how to incorporate what I'm trying to express through design and through what the player is doing, and how to tell a story in a non-traditional way. Like there's a lot of literal storytelling in video games, but there's also ways to push theme and like texture within the game, your actions, what you're doing, the things you're picking up, the significance of each thing. It's really easy to tell a story through like an allegory type situation too. It's easy to experiment with a lot of different odd storytelling methods with video games.
Yeah, and the games that I've looked at of yours are very original conceptually. Coil, for instance, has got eggs and sperm and cells dividing, and then it's quite mysterious with this running emotional commentary, and I didn't quite understand the correlation between the two, but it got me thinking in a lot of different ways, which I mean is what I think real art does. It makes you think, it makes you feel things you haven't felt before. And I was just wondering, with something like that, where does that concept start for you?
It really depends on what moves me. Like, my games tend to be very different. Like a game like Coil and a game like Super Meat Boy there's no connection. And sometimes I'll want to make something that's just fun, something that like is more playful and fun. And in a lot of ways, Binding of Isaac still was playful and fun.
Yeah.
Something like Coil was more dark, experimental, and weird, more like an interactive painting. I just get bored easy. I like to try different genres, and the game I'm working on right now, Mugenics, is not like anything else I've worked on either, and it's an odd social commentary. It's exploring a lot of elements of our broken brains and the animals that we are inside, and all that sort of stuff too. And I've been watching a lot of Hoarders too, so so there's always that.
It features cats, right?
Cats, tons of cats.
Now
it's a play off of eugenics. It's about cat breeding, selective cat breeding.
Oh, horrid.
Well, depending on how horrid you want to be. I mean, you don't need to kill the cats.
I don't mean your game is. I don't like selective breeding of animals. That's what I was meaning, not your game.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, that's what it's about. I mean, it's about selective breeding. It's about breeding the ultimate cat, and it's wrong in all the right ways. It's totally goes straight for it. I mean, it's about hoarding animals. It's about hoarding items. It's about filling your house with a hoard of things that are valuable to you, that you assign meaning to,
right,
that are needed. And it's interesting. It's kind of more of a toy than a game right now. But it's Tommy gets to make cat brains, and he's doing that right now. He's trying to make them actually think like a cat would think.
That's cool. I just imagine reading that on a resume, sort of. It's an unusual occupation, that's for sure. Some people feel that, video games are mindless, and I know your game AVGM was developed in part as a reaction against the kind of games where, you just rewarded for clicking and time spent and jumping through hoops. What part of human nature are you hoping to kind of stimulate? Because obviously you're not doing that kind of a game.
Well, in a lot of ways, I kind of am right now. I mean, I'm exploring that broken aspect of people's brains with eugenics. I mean, it's in a comfortable, fun way.
Right.
Like I'm dancing around it without going directly for it. I mean, those kind of games you're talking about are games that they're business design. It's like, how can we make money? It has nothing to do with the game. It's barely game design. It's business plan. Now what we do here is it's like a lotto ticket, really. Like, well, we'll say, the behind door number 2, it could be something really valuable, but you need to click, 15 times to get it. And then you're like, okay, click 15 times. Then it's like, okay, it's this little reward or whatever. And it's like, okay, here's door number 3. You can click 100 times, or you can just pay 50 cents. And once your brain gets into that weird slot machine logic, which is why everybody loses their money, it's why gambling is an addiction.
Right.
And that's essentially what these companies are doing, is feeding off a broken part of people's brains that wants to go, wants to keep pulling the slot machine and trying their luck, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because it's also playing off of the part of your brain that makes you think, hey, I'm smart. Why would I want to click 100 times when I can just pay?
Right. So you feel like you're kind of beating the system.
Yeah, you feel like you're beating the system,
but actually it's playing you.
Yeah, it's bad. It's horrible. I mean, and it has nothing to do with game design. And it's just awful in every way. I've never seen it used in a way that was appropriate in any way. But it's fun to kind of dance around that, because we're designing a game that has a lot of those aspects, but we're not asking people to pay more for these things. Right.
Okay. And will it still have the level of difficulty that your other games have had?
No, it's definitely more of a casual game. I mean, it probably has its little difficulty peaks. It's hard for me to say something's difficult, because I don't think The Binding of Isaac is that difficult, but other people would say that it is.
That's because you know how to do it, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's challenging. Challenging is, I guess, a better word.
Okay. Which? Mugenics will be challenging?
Mugenics can be challenging.
Okay.
I mean, the cats can be challenging themselves.
Yeah,
you've got to... They're cats, and they act like cats, so they're not going to necessarily do what you like, and then once you found the perfect one, then you've got to, put them in contests or fight them.
Oh, okay.
So there's that aspect of it.
Right. Interesting. Well, if you just joined us, I'm talking to Edmund McMillen, who is a Santa Cruz native, indie game designer, artist, about his games, most well-known game, Super Meat Boy, and his new game, Eugenics. If you want to find out more about him and his art and his work, you can go to his website, edmundm.com. And we're going to go to a commercial break now, but do keep it here as we keep talking to Edmund. You're listening to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland on KSCO AM 1080. Welcome back. You're listening to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland, and my guest of this hour, Edmund McMillen, artist and indie game designer. And we were just talking during the break, and I think you were saying that there's some interaction that you had with KSCO while you were designing one of your games. Interaction in the loosest sense.
Yeah, yeah, actually, I lived up the street. I lived on Al Street. It's just really close.
Okay.
I used to walk by here every day when me and my wife would take walks. And it was quite a few years ago. I was developing a game called Time F Word.
Right. Which I called Time Bleep earlier.
Yeah. And it's a game about perspective. It's a game about dead ends, career-wise, family-wise, socially. It was kind of inspired by a 10-year high school reunion that I went to, and everybody was kind of stuck in this self-imposed box that they put themselves in early high school, and it's like, whoa, these people haven't progressed at all. And it started out as that, and then once I kind of got into it, it became more of a self-reflective thing where I realized that I was also in this self-imposed box when it came to my career and my work situation, where I was kind of in a dead end was working with a guy who wasn't really inspired to continue, and I realized that I was just like these people, and it became kind of this self-reflective game, and then there was a major tone of insanity in it, where because at times I felt a little crazy, especially when working on weird games, and I try to draw it out and put it in the game. So there's this kind of this really odd theme in the game where you're switching dimensions constantly. It's a game about perspective. The whole idea is like, the solution is right behind you if you're able to just turn around and look at it. You're not at a dead end. You have options. You have lots of options. Just turn around. And the game takes place inside a box. And you're just progressing through this box in these like multi-dimensional layers. And between levels, there's this kind of like off-air, like the old off-air TV signal thing, the one with the
yeah.
And that's when you're kind of switching dimensions, and it has this really weird sounding radio station, like it fades in and out of a radio station, like it's switching stations and it fades in and out. And that was initially put in because while I was working on it, I had unsecured wires on my speakers, and I was picking up a faint signal when everything was off, like through the speakers. And I could hear you guys here.
From KSCO?
Yeah, but I didn't know that was happening. I just thought I was losing my mind. And I was kind of playing with...
Hearing people talking on the radio.
Sleep deprivation and that sort of stuff, too. So I was feeling pretty crazy at the time. And I kept picking up the radio thing. And then the radio thing felt significant to me, so I thought I'd put it in the game, and that's why there's a radio switching theme, the audio in the game. You kind of like switch stations.
Yeah, that puts a whole new take on thinking you're hearing radio in your head. That's interesting. And one of the things I liked about that game was how you can only do certain things in one dimension, and then you have to flip back to the other dimension in order to do the next thing, so you're going back and forth, and A, you have to work that out for yourself, and B, it just seemed like an interesting, I'm very interested in string theory and that idea of parallel universes, and I think it just opens your mind to think that there's a different way of doing things, a different place of doing things, perhaps somehow. Yeah,
I was definitely obsessing over, for those who don't know, the whole game starts with you're the player, Stephen, and you run into yourself, and yourself tells you that you need to get in this box. It's super important. And then as you progress through the game, you start getting these broken broadcasts or texts, whatever you want to call them, from your future self that's kind of helping you along. And then as you progress, time stops existing, and you start getting messages from you just entering the box, and then you start getting messages from you that has died, trapped in a wall. You get these panicked things. It gets darker and weirder as you go, and eventually you grow this tumor on your head, and the tumor grows into
I forgot about that. Yeah,
another version of you, and then you've got two yous, and you don't know who is you. But there's a bad one, and there's a good one, and you're fighting against yourself for control over reality of who gets to exit the box and continue onto the world. And it's just it's a very basic internal. You're fighting against yourself for your future. Yeah.
There's a lot of psychological aspects to your games, and there's a psychologist called Alice Miller I really admire, and she studied many artists, including Picasso, and she found that art can transmute psychological pain and also inhibit psychological damage from trauma. Some of the artists she studied, not just painters, but also like Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, people who'd had difficult experiences as children but had used their art in some way to transmute those experiences. I'm just wondering, as there's so many psychological aspects to your games, if that's conscious at all for you in the process of what you're doing. Are you channeling any of your kind of psyche into your art, or are you just putting it out there?
I think that's that's what I'm doing. I think I learn more when I end up jumping into a project creatively that I'm, experimenting with some aspect of who I am. I feel like it helps me grow as a person. It lets me understand things more. And the cool thing about it is I get to finish it and then put it out and then hear what everybody else interprets. and their own experiences.
Right.
For the most part, a lot of people don't even care. And I don't care that if people don't care. Like, it's not a big deal. You play the game and have fun, whatever.
Yeah.
But there are a select few people that actually will, debate on what this means and what they felt and what they think, and it's pretty interesting at times where I get other perspectives, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. This is like a safe way for me to interact with other people. Like, people frighten me, and I don't like groups of people, and the internet's scary in itself, but it's a safe way for me to interact with people. I get to put a game out, I get to say something in the game, and then I get this kind of dialogue back and forth with these people that it's in a safe way that I can allow. And I don't have to respond to everything, of course, but I can if I want to. And I think that's really helped me personally grow and realize who I am and develop as a more whole person.
Do you think there's an aspect of working out any parts of your past through your work?
I think for sure. I think for me, the older I get, the more I think I realize that I'm trying so hard to go backwards. I think I find that my very young self was where I was at my purest, where I was at my best, creatively and everything, back when I could believe in monsters and aliens and everything. I can't bring myself to believe these things anymore. And there's definitely, and that's why I think there's an ongoing theme in my work of children, and it's always a kid, in my work. And I think I'm definitely trying to go back there because there's a magic to being a child. And it's fun to revisit.
Yeah.
The whimsy.
Yeah. That's why string theory is good, because it's like Father Christmas or Santa Claus, or any of these like magical figures. I think, that you can always feel that they're in another dimension if they're not here necessarily.
Yeah.
But also, you saying that made me think about Maslow talking about self-actualization and how there's a drive in all of us to be all that we can be, or that's when we're at our most healthy. And I think for many people, that going back to a child is when you feel that. And for some of us, at some point in our childhood, that's got shut down, and you've been told in whatever way you're not okay and you can't be all that you can be, and then you have to try and get that back later in life. But I'm just wondering whether that's part of it for you. Is that just that sense of everything's a possibility? Yeah,
I mean, if it isn't, it's an unconscious part of it, I'm sure. Like going kind of back and just jumping in. And I mean, I try not to put a lot of thought into a lot of the things I do. I try to allow myself to feel it and then allow it to come out. And then after, I can overanalyze what I've done.
Right, yeah.
It just doesn't come off as genuine if I'm going to sit down and actually detail out all the things I want to do. Even with Mugenics, that's what I've said is kind of the basis of what I feel. And I don't know exactly what all the aspects of the game are about, or why, even the times why I'm doing something. Sometimes it just seems correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes it seems appropriate to what I'm doing and it feels right. So let's move that direction and see where it goes. And that's kind of how I work. I like improvising, and even though it's pretty difficult to improvise in a more rigid, artistic environment like a video game, it's still doable, and it's the thing I enjoy about it the most, I think.
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of real art, is that, often the creator, it has goals that they're trying to meet, but also something's coming through them that they don't even realize often until it's there. And I don't know if that's from the collective unconscious or where it comes from, but I think that's a fascinating thing as an artist, is that you can look at your work and find things in it that you didn't consciously even put there but got there.
And it's fun too, because then it's like a little puzzle in itself.
Yeah.
I go through my comics when I was a teenager that made little or no sense back then, and I look back and I'm like, oh my god, I totally understood what I was going through. I mean, I didn't then, but it was very clear to me now from what I've read and what I drew and stuff. And I've definitely felt the same way with a lot of the stuff game wise that I've gone through. It definitely feels like it has more meaning as time passes and I grow older and gain more wisdom and understand myself a little bit better. Yeah. I can kind of go back and reflect and be like, okay, that's where I was.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I'm not there anymore.
And I read somewhere that your grandmother kept all your childhood drawings and at some point gave them to you. That must have been wonderful.
Yeah, it was. It was telling, very, very telling. I was growing up. A lot of teachers thought I was disturbed, and I got pulled away. And there was lots of. My mom had to come to lots of after-school meetings with teachers who would try to convince her that I needed help. And I mean, in a lot of ways, it did help. I did have things wrong with me. I was dyslexic, and because that's how it kind of started. It was like my third grade teacher was like, "There's something severely wrong with him. He's totally mentally disturbed, and he needs help." So they put me through this situation. It's like a counselor comes in, sits down with you, and asks you a bunch of questions, and then it kind of, I guess it transitioned into her realizing that like I was dyslexic and I struggled with a lot of things in school. Like I had a hard time with writing and reading. It was very hard. I mean, even now I know I'm not functioning on the same level as other people when it comes to how I read. Because if I haven't seen a word before, I'm going to say a different word that I think it looks like.
Yeah.
But
you see, I would say I'm a big advocate for learning differences, that you're not on the same level, you're just on a different level. And, we've created this very narrow way that people have to show what they know. And, you go back in history, and I don't know what the exact percentage is, but maybe 1% of people could read and write, and it didn't include the kings and people who were in power, you know. So it's become so narrowly defined, and I think that the way with globalization and the whole job market is going in a direction where we have to really do away with this and bring in the different kinds of minds and help them grow and be more creative.
Yeah, I mean, but in a lot of ways, it's one of those things I look back on and think, well, that was one of the things that made me feel different, and not necessarily on a bad level. I did grow up with the stigma of feeling stupid. I did feel stupid a lot. But I also felt different. And I think that difference, I was, instead of like becoming a victim and, woe is me, I'm stupid, everybody is more advanced than me. I saw it as that I was this alien, and there was something in me that was different than everybody else. So I must have abilities that these kids don't have. And I just focused on that aspect, and I just reveled in being the weird kid.
Yeah.
I was just the black sheep of everything for quite a long time, and I had no problem with it.
But what an insight, that you had as a child. I mean, the way of describing it, of being an alien because you're different, but you have talents that other people don't have. And I mean, that's the truth, isn't it? It's like, and you were showing that in your art, presumably, in these drawings.
It helped to have my grandma around. She was kind of the person who kind of pushed that aspect. Like, she made me feel I wasn't stupid. I was just different in all the good ways, and that and my differences were going to matter in the long run. Yeah. She made me believe that at a very early age.
Yeah. Well, my favorite psychologist, Alice Miller, the other thing she's found was very important is that if you have an enlightened witness in your life, it doesn't matter how awful your upbringing is, how traumatic, how badly you're treated. If you have one person who can hold the light for you, your truth, even if it's not all the time, who can reflect to you that you are who you really are, that has a completely different effect than people who've never had that. For instance, Hitler and Stalin didn't have any enlightened witnesses, and we all know how that went. So I think that's wonderful that you had your grandmother to do that. Or
I could have been the next Hitler.
Yeah. That's not quite where I was going.
Thanks,
yeah,
Grandma.
You could have been. Anyway, we're coming towards the end of the show now. So I guess we should just ask for everybody out there who's waiting for eugenics, is there any, I know I read somewhere it said it'll be ready when it's ready, or do you have any
it is
plan?
Definitely this year. I mean,
okay.
I mean,
That's good.
I'm working on, there's Eugenics, and then there's Binding of Isaac Rebirth, which is like a remake of Binding of Isaac for consoles and everything else like that. So the goal is both of those games to come out later this year. Eugenics is the one that I'm working on more hands-on with, and it's done when it's done. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I know all your fans are going to eagerly await for it, and whenever it comes out, they're going to jump on it. Well, thank you so much for coming in. Again, if you're listening and you want to know more about Edmund and you don't already know his website, it's edmundm.com. And just thank you so much. It's been really interesting talking to you.
Thanks. It's been a nice change of pace.
Great. You're listening to It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland. I hope to have you with me next week, Wednesday, 2 till 4. You're listening on KSCO AM 1080 Santa Cruz.